here's everything you might have missed in What If Episode 1. We are now officially in the multiverse, Marvel fans, because after Sylvie turned He Who Remains into Remains on Loki, we knew the ramifications for the Marvel Cinematic Universe would be positively massive. And now What If is here to give us our first glimpse into the endless hypotheticals of what the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse holds in store for us. Now, the first MCU animated series premiered on Disney Plus on Wednesday and introduced us to both the tallest baby in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it showed us a very different path for one Peggy Carter. The first episode of What If asks a simple question. What if Peggy Carter took the Super Soldier Serum instead of Steve Rogers and became the first Avenger? Well, the results speak for themselves, and the series premiere is packed to the gills with Easter eggs, deep-cut characters, and details that you might have missed. As always, if you prefer to read all about it, Rosie Knight has you covered over on Nerdist.com. Now we're going to break things down in just a moment, but first a quick warning. To talk about What If Episode 1 in detail, we do need to spoil what happened, so if you're worried about that sort of thing, leave now before you get caught totally unaware.
What? Scheiße.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Let's start with the simplest Easter egg and reference of all, the show's title. Now, for those who don't know, the series is inspired by the cult classic comic book series of the same name. First published in 1977, What If took us inside the moon base of Uatu the Watcher, who proceeded to spin yarns about alternate realities in the Marvel Universe. And that's exactly what the show aims to do here. While these stories are more rooted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we will see some alternate reality stories straight out of the comics, like the upcoming Marvel Zombies episode. Now, this episode begins with Jeffrey Wright as the Watcher, better known to his friends as Uatu or Ubone if you guys are like really close. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the Watcher first appeared in 1963's Fantastic Four number 13, although his name, Uatu, wasn't revealed until Captain Marvel number 39 in 1975. Now, the Watchers are a group of mysterious, highly advanced beings that observe and record events for posterity rather than interfere. Because, as revealed in Tales of Suspense 52 and 53, the last time they tried to share their knowledge, well, it led to all-out nuclear war, so now they prefer to watch. Marvel fans may remember that we saw a group of Watchers previously in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 during Stan Lee's cameo scene, where it was revealed that he was one of the Watcher's many informants. It also has us wondering if we could perhaps see an animated Stan Lee cameo at some point during the series, so stay tuned and Excelsior!
Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted.
The Watcher reveals that time, space, and reality are more than just a linear path. They're flexible, malleable things that branch off in unexpected and surprising directions. Much like Sylvie stabbing He Who Remains irrevocably altered the multiverse, this first episode shows us another instance of how a single action can have a snowball effect, leading to an entirely different reality. The first episode focuses on arguably the series' most important character, Peggy Carter, and her split-second decision to stay by Steve Rogers' side as he preps for his Super Soldier transformation. Now one thing leads to another, and Peggy becomes the one to climb into the Vita-Ray chamber from Captain America the First Avenger and transforms into the towering beef castle that is Captain Carter, the First Avenger. Speaking with IO9, executive producer Brad Winderbaum explained that Captain Carter is the driving force of this series, and that we realized as we started developing the second season that Captain Carter was going to be the character we would revisit in every season and continue that adventure. Now, considering we've seen her teased in trailers opposite Doctor Strange as well, I would say this is far from the last we've seen of Captain Carter, but more on that in just a bit. True to its title, this episode is jam-packed with alternate what-if versions of iconic scenes and moments from Captain America the First Avenger. One of the biggest differences here, though, is that we see Colonel John Flynn, played by Bradley Whitford, in a much more prominent role. You may recall Flynn from the Agent Carter one-shot, where he led one of the New York City offices of the Strategic Scientific Reserve, the organization that would go on to become S.H.I.E.L.D. in the MCU. Here, too, he's constantly undermining Peggy and refuses to believe in her until it's time to take credit for her accomplishments. So perhaps his role is bigger here, though, because we see Tommy Lee Jones's character, Colonel Phillips, get shot by the Hydra spy following the cigarette case explosion, rather than Dr. Erskine like in the film. Although it does sound like Dr. Erskine also dies in this attack based on what follows. Peggy's whole transformation sequence, by the way, is basically a shot-for-shot mirror of what happens to Steve in the first Avenger, so kudos to the animators for their attention to detail right down to the facial expressions. Later on, when Peggy's taking out her aggression in the gym like Steve Rogers does with that punching bag in The Avengers, Steve jokes that at least they didn't stick her on one of those USO tours. Now this is a nice nod to one of my favorite and the silliest part of Captain America the First Avenger, when Steve finds himself a piece of walking, talking propaganda performing stage shows set to the sweet strains of the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan. In this universe, though, the government and military seemingly would rather keep Peggy out of the limelight rather than parade her around like a show pony. During this scene, Steve also references his good pal from Brooklyn, Bucky, who we'll see more of in just a little bit. And he also tells Peggy that he was never much of a dancer anyway. This constant allusion to dancing runs throughout not just this episode, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. It's a reference to the dance date they so desperately want to go on, but can't happen until Steve literally time travels to make it happen in Avengers Endgame. Now, just like in Captain America, though, Captain Carter is going to miss that date because she gets sucked into a Hydra portal towards the end of the episode. As the SSR plans their mission to stop Hydra, Howard Stark mentions gamma signatures, which immediately conjure to mind the Hulk, given that gamma radiation is what gives Bruce Banner his powers. However, here it seems like Stark is talking about the power signature given off by the Tesseract, which Bruce Banner and Tony Stark were able to use to track it in Avengers.
Call every lab you know. Tell them to put the spectrometers on the roof and calibrate them for gamma rays.
We learn that Hydra's in Turnsburg, Norway, and this is a significant location in the MCU. It's where Odin fought the Frost Giants and Thor, later leaving the Tesseract for safekeeping with his worshippers. It's also the location where Red Skull gets his nasty Nazi mitts on the Tesseract in the first Avenger, hidden within the carving of Yggdrasil, the World Tree, just like we see happen in this episode. But most recently, Turnsburg became the site of New Asgard in Avengers Endgame, where King Valkyrie rules over the Asgardian refugees, and Thor gets dunked on in Fortnite by Noobmaster69.
Noobmaster, hey, it's Thor again.
But speaking of that Yggdrasil carving, though, it alludes to the massive monster we're going to see later in this episode, too. There's a large circular portal-like carving surrounded by writhing tentacles. And although this Lovecraftian monster goes unnamed in the episode, there are only so many Lovecraftian monsters in the Marvel Universe, and one of them fits the bill almost to a T. I'm talking about Shumagoroth. First appearing in full in 1973's Marvel premiere number 10, Shumagoroth is perhaps best known for its appearance in Marvel Superheroes and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, video games I spent many hours playing at Wakefield House of Pizza growing up. Rumored to be one of the villains of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, this extra-dimensional multiversal monster has a history of fighting the Sorcerer Supreme. And adding further fuel to this fire are these panels from Marvel Premiere number 10, which bear a striking resemblance to the background of this shot featuring Doctor Strange and Peggy Carter from the What If trailer as well. So if Shumagoroth is destined to appear in the Multiverse of Madness, it makes sense that we might see this ancient being in another multiversal story like What If first. And for more on Shumagoroth, make sure you check out Rosie Knight's deep dive over on Nerdist.com. When Howard Stark gives Peggy her full Captain Carter uniform, it's purposely meant to evoke Captain America's costume. But we can't help but think of another comic book hero as well. I'm talking about Captain Britain. Although this is a very different character with a very different power set, the similarities are there. Created by Chris Claremont and Herb Trimpe in 1976, Brian Braddock is Captain Britain, and his most enduring costume is incredibly reminiscent of what we see Peggy wearing here. I mean, she even gets a version of his signature weapon, the Sword of Might, by the episode's end, so not saying, but just saying. Anyway, speaking of the Tesseract, its journey through the MCU is very different this time around as well. Peggy retrieves it from Arnim Zola during their battle in Berlin by the Brandenburg Gate, and that glowing blue box that houses the Space Stone is then used by Howard Stark to create a massive mech, the first Iron Man suit dubbed the Hydra Stomper. Peggy then frees some familiar faces from a Hydra prison, Bucky Barnes, Dum-Dum Dugan, and the Howling Commandos. In the comics, the Howling Commandos were led by Nick Fury, who is much older than his MCU counterpart. In a nice parallel to the first Avenger, though, we then see Peggy leading the Howling Commandos here, rather than Steve Rogers like in the movie. And speaking of Steve, he winds up piloting the giant Hydra Stomper mech, which looks like the bastard child of the Iron Giant and the Iron Man suit that Tony Stark built in a cave with a box of scraps. I'm sorry.
With a box of scraps!
Now, if you look closely, the suit here reads C-15, which is most likely a reference to the Agent Carter series debuting in 2015. We also get several other parallels to the first Avenger in this episode. The montage sequence of Peggy beating Hydra and the Nazis back, Peggy taking down a tank like it's nothing at all, and Steve writing Brooklyn on his mech suit like we see place names written on various bombs in that movie. Moving on, we come to an all too familiar scene, an attack on a Hydra-controlled train, which in the first Avenger is where Bucky falls to his presumed death. Here though, Bucky is saved by Peggy and he jokes,
Woo! Thanks! You almost ripped my arm off!
this is a reference to his main universe future as the vibranium-armed Winter Soldier. But speaking of unexpected tragedy, in an inversion of what happens in the MCU, we see Steve seemingly die during this train raid rather than Bucky. But just like Bucky in the main timeline, Steve ultimately survives this ordeal thanks to good old-fashioned American ingenuity courtesy of Howard Stark, rather than decades of psychological torture and conditioning at Hydra's hands. Also of note, the name of this mission, Where Eagles Dare, is a nod to the classic 1968 movie of the same name, which features a group of Secret Intelligence Service soldiers raiding a German castle to rescue a captured ally. Now, it's not necessarily a one-to-one here, but the shared DNA is strong enough that it merits mentioning. Later on, inside of Hydra's hilariously named Castle de Krek, we see the extra-dimensional murder monster crawling forth from the portal and, guys, come on, it's Shumagorath! I mean, look, this is basically a direct recreation of how Shumagorath enters the matches and his Chaos Dimension hyper combos in Marvel Superheroes and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. It's all there! Besides, it immediately murders Red Skull, so it can't be that bad, can it? During the showdown with the monster, though, Howard Stark jokes that he spent a weekend with Hedy Lamarr, but she didn't teach him German. Born in 1914, Lamarr was a popular actress, inventor, and real-life Nazi fighter who developed a radio frequency system to help defeat the Nazis. Her dating Howard Stark in the MCU is likely a nod to the fact that she dated Howard Hughes in real life and helped him make his aircraft more aerodynamic. So, wait a minute, what did she work on with Howard Stark? Oh. As Peggy wields her Captain Britain-esque sword, she battles the beast back into the portal, sacrificing herself to save the day. And here she effectively disappears from this timeline for decades to come, much like Steve Rogers did when he crash-landed a weapons-filled plane into the ocean. This scene in What If, though, is just as brutal because once again, they make a date for a dance on Saturday night, just like their tragic farewell in the first Avenger. Later, Peggy emerges from that extra-dimensional portal, having seemingly killed that tentacled murder monster, only to find that what felt like mere moments for her unfolded over the course of 70 years in her world. She emerges to find herself face-to-face with Nick Fury and Hawkeye, who's straight up starstruck at being face-to-face with the legendary Captain Carter. And this too echoes Steve Rogers' experience waking up from his ice bath decades later, only to be greeted by one Nick Fury. And much like Nick Fury told Loki to put down the spear in Avengers, here he tells Peggy to put down the sword.
Ma'am, please put down the sword.
So the question then becomes, will Captain Carter lead her universe's version of the Avengers? Is she going to be a key component in whatever team the Watcher might be assembling over the course of this season? Maybe some sort of Guardians of the Multiverse? Well, only time will tell, and fortunately we already have a video all about that exact possibility, which I will link for you in the description below. One thing though is for certain, if Steve Rogers winds up becoming this world's Winter Soldier, I'm gonna lose my damn mind. Why would you do this to me? Anyway, there you have it, folks. That is everything we spotted in the first episode of What If. It was a solid first entry into the multiversal mayhem of Marvel's new animated series, and I can't wait to see it get even weirder and wilder in the episodes ahead. In the meantime, though, we're gonna have plenty of deep dives, Easter eggs, and theories connected to each episode and the rest of the MCU for you over on Nerdist.com. For now, though, tell us, what did you think of What If's first episode? Did you spot anything that we missed?
That was brilliant!
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.